Welcome to Music and Movies, the stories of my life, Chapter 5. Previously, and this will be a quick one, 1961 on Bar Mitzvah. That's my father, Jacob Arkish. He was very proud of me that day. It was a very, very big day in my life. And 3 years later, another big day, because like the rest of the country, it was time to meet the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And by 8:15 that night, I had been levitated. And 5 months later, the Beatles did it to me again when I went to see A Hard Day's Night. And I came out of that movie a changed person. When I got home, my parents asked me, "How was your Beatle movie?" And I said, it was really well directed. I started to think that someone was in charge of this, or someone had thought of all this. And I was never going to be in a rock and roll band, but maybe I could make movies with music in them. All right? Now, the generation gap was looming, and I was on the wrong side of it. To this man, this is Mr. Kelly, my world history teacher, who pretty much considered me an enemy of the state, because this is the side that I wanted to be on. Dylan, Joan Baez. So, we're all caught up. Now, I had drawn the analogy the last time from this book of Time in the River by Thomas Wolfe, in which he meets a professor whose whole life is around him in his books in his library. And all the books have bookmarks in them that are the episodes of his life, the lessons that he learned from the books and the way he shared his life with all his students. And this is another bookmark in the story of my life. There'll be two today because it came out too long in the earlier takes, so I divided them in half. And the first half is called Hydrogen Jukebox. So, here I am with my lovely sister Claudia outside our home, 1316 Abbott Boulevard. I must be 8, 9 years old, man in uniform, Cub Scout. But see, that's not the uniform I wanted to be in. There was only one uniform for me. The New York Yankees. I loved the Yankees with all my heart. I was devastated in 1955 when they lost the World Series to the Brooklyn Dodgers, and 1956 over the moon when they won the World Series. Now, I loved everyone on the team. I loved their names. Yogi Berra, what a catcher. What a hitter. Elston Howard, Whitey Ford. I mean, his mother may have called him Bill, but we always knew him as Moose Skowron, first baseman for the Yankees. And there was a Yankee that's whole methodology caught my fancy. He was a relief pitcher. He'd come in the ninth inning for Whitey Ford. I don't think he had very good sight. He had really thick glasses. And this is how he started every game. He'd wind up and throw the ball, and I kid you not, 110 miles an hour with no control. It would fly over everyone's head into the backstop. Wham! Second pitch. Wind up 110 miles an hour. Now it hit in the dirt and go right past where the batter would have been standing. Now, this strategy would cause the batters to think he's gonna kill me. He would get and then, strike people out. Ryan was good, but when he had a bad inning, he would never even get close to the plate. And this is what Ryan would look like heading for the dugout. Casey Stengel, pull him out. Now, my favorite Yankee. Okay, here we go. Bats from both sides of the plate. Number 7, you know who I'm going to talk about. Plays center field, one of the greatest hitters of all time, Mickey Mantle. I loved everything about Mickey Mantle. I tried to learn how to hit from both sides of the plate. I could barely hit from one side. Look at this. This is Mick burying one in the right field bleachers. There's that ball. Now, when I was in Little League, we used to go to Yankee games, and we'd be sitting in right field. It cost only 75 cents with our gloves, hoping to catch one of these balls. That's how out of touch we were. Now, I really, really wanted to be a Yankee. Only a couple things were holding me back. I had no particular talent for baseball, and I wasn't much of an athlete. And this other thing was plaguing on my mind. There were no Jews on the Yankees. In fact, didn't seem to be any Jews in baseball. So I went to my father and we had a serious discussion. And when I brought it up, he said, no, Allen, there is a Jew in baseball. And one of the greatest, Hank Greenberg, right? See that face? See that nose? Now, Hank, are you ready for this? Was known as the Hebrew Hammer. There's a name for you. I mean, he won the MVP twice. At one season, he had 58 home runs. But still, there was something different about Hank. I mean, here's his official picture. This does not look like a confident guy from Oklahoma like Mickey Mantle. This guy is worried. And he's got 1,200 lifetime RBIs, and he's worried if he's ever going to hit the ball again. That is a Hebrew. Luckily for me, the next fascination I had was music. And the greatest of all the people in music, the one that I loved, was a Jew, Bob Dylan. My parents gave me this record in 1965 for my birthday. I played it to death. This has got Subterranean Homesick Blues, Maggie's Farm, My Love, She Speaks Like Silence, Mr. Tambourine Man, It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, which has a line that is still ringing true today. Even the President of the United States must have to stand naked. It's from It's All Right, Ma. It was true for LBJ, and it's double true for the guy in the White House now. This is... Every time I played this record, my mother would say the same thing. She'd say, and I pretty much had her brainwashed about this. Yes, I know he's an important singer. I know he's a poet, and the lyrics are great, but I just don't like his voice and the way he sings. I guess a lot of people felt that way because a couple years later, Columbia Records did an ad campaign where the catch line was, nobody sings Dylan like Dylan. At the time, Dylan was getting to be a pretty successful person, and he did a lot of press conferences, and people asked him all kinds of lame questions, which, if you were on the other side of the press like I was, a fan, you thought Dylan's responses were funny. They'd say, you're a protest singer. How many protest singers do you think there are in America? And Dylan would say, 35. You go, no, there's 33. Now, someone also asked him once, who is the greatest poet in America? And without missing a beat, he answered, Smokey Robinson. Tracks of My Tears. That's a great song. Great answer, Bob. Now, speaking of poetry, I was still into the girl groups. Everybody's doing a brand new dance now. Come on, baby, do the locomotion. Carole King. Still love this song. Locomotion, Little Eva. Okay. Now, I was also getting into other kinds of music. I had bought, I think I showed you that Electra sample, which had the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. This is it. This is their first record. What a badass bunch of guys. I had never really heard electric Chicago-style blues. And this album just blew me away. And there was a message to me on the back of this record. Now, I don't know if you can read that. It says, we suggest that you play this record at the highest possible volume. Sound advice. It's advice that I still take today. Now, I was reading the back of the record, and it said here, lead guitar, which sounded, very sexy. The lead guitar player's name was Mike Bloomfield. Another Landsman, another Jew. And here's a picture of Mike. And Mike's playing on this record. Well, if the blues is like a great 50s car, Mike played it like a 50s car with a turbocharger in it. His tone, his driving, way he just drove songs, the production by Paul Rothchild. This is one of the great, albums of my youth. Born in Chicago is the lead song. Mike just kills it on Blues with a Feeling. Also, Look Over Yonder Walls. I became enamored with Mike once I saw this band live. So I've always read a lot about Mike and admired him. So here's what he looked like. And a little backstory on Mike. He was born in Chicago and grew up there. And his father was an industrialist who made kitchenwares. You know those sugar shakers that you turn upside down and have a silver top? That's what Mike's father's made. Now, Mike was very talented, and his father and him had a terrible relationship. His father never once said anything good about Mike. This is from reading books and stuff. And his father wanted him to go in the business, and Mike wanted none of it. Mike was super talented, and being in Chicago, he'd sneak into blues clubs. In fact, I guess the relationship between Mike and his family got so bad that when he was 14 years old, he kind of went away from home and actually went out on the road with a bunch of black blues musicians. And he wrote about it in a book called Me and Big Joe. It's got a hilarious chapter about this first time this 14-year-old got drunk. And he gets woken up the next morning, terrible hangover, and they push this hangover cure in front of him, which is pig snouts and hot sauce. Guy is like 1 year out of his bar mitzvah. Now, he was in the early years, he was on the folk circuit. In 1963, he runs into Bob Dylan, who's on the folk circuit, and they bond and become friends. And 2 years later, Dylan calls him up and says, "I want you to come play on a couple of sessions in New York that I'm doing." And Mike only didn't have a rock and roll guitar, and Dylan wanted him to play rock and roll. So he shows up with a brand new Fender. It's wet because it's raining out, and he plugs it in, and out comes this. Like a Rolling Stone, my favorite song of all time. Yes, that Mike Bloomfield is on this song. So, Mike was very adventurous, you know. He was never one to stand still. And this is the second Butterfield record. And it's got this interesting, important piece of music on it called East West, which is a long jam that combines the influences of Indian raga music and John Coltrane's chromatic scaling and the way that Coltrane would improvise. Now, the thing about Mike is this band was really, really important and doing incredible, but Mike had a way of not ruining his career, but always making the wrong decision. And he decided he should have stayed with Butterfield. He decided to form his own band, and they were called the Electric Flag. But still, his talent shone through because at the same time as the Electric Flag were just starting to record, they did a soundtrack record for Roger Corman's The Trip. See, big connection here. This is an outstanding soundtrack. I asked Roger at lunch not that long ago, I said, "Roger, why did you hire the Electric Flag?" He said, "Oh, Alan, I didn't even know who they were. It was Peter Fonda. Peter told me about them." I said, "Very hip choice." He says, "Yes, just have to listen to people who know something." That's why I love Roger. Anyway, this is great. And so the Electric Flag, there was a lot of dissension in this band. This is a good album, but they didn't really last past this record because not only was the problems of the chemistry of everyone, heroin entered the scene. And they had some people used a lot of drugs, and Mike started using heroin. But still, he was an outstanding musician, and a person he had met on the sessions for Bob Dylan's, Highway 61 Revisited, was a keyboard player named Al Cooper. Al Cooper's a really interesting person in rock history. Al Cooper plays on Who Wears Shorts, a terrible song, but he was in I think they were called the Nashville Teens, and then he wrote a big hit song for Gary Lewis and the Playboys called This Diamond Ring. This diamond ring doesn't shine for me anymore. Anyway, Al was hanging around the music scene, and he got to play on Like a Rolling Stone. And what's interesting is that he actually had never played the organ before. This was his first time on the organ, and it's one of the most memorable parts in, organ history. He became a favorite of Dylan, and he's on Highway 61, and he's also on Blonde on Blonde. He started a band called the Blues Project, and after that, a band called Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And he always stayed in touch with with Mike, and he got Mike, away from his environment, and together they did this jam album. There's Mike, and it was a very successful record. There was just one problem. Between Mike's heroin and his sort of neuroses, and I don't want to overanalyze the guy, but he had, I guess, the issues of his father just kept staying with him. He had, he had stage fright and insomnia, and he bailed on the sessions for this about halfway through. And then Al gave him another chance. And in the live concerts, he bailed on the tour, went home, and kind of never came out because the heroin set in. And although he did a couple of small blues records over the years, he actually ended up playing on some porno soundtracks. And sadly, in 1981, he was found in a car parked in San Francisco, dead of a heroin overdose. And his best friend, Al Cooper, made this record, From His Head to His Heart to His Hands. That really sums up the quality of Mike Bloomfield's playing. He had an incredible tone, incredible musicality, and yet when he would change, and he started, when he was on East West and other things, he started playing something that he used to call sweet blues, and no one else played it like Mike. It's really sad that now all that's left of Mike, is this box set. And when I saw him live, he was engaging and witty and self-deprecating and a generous musician. I saw him once with B.B. King. It was fantastic. So, while all this is going on in the world of music, let's not forget my alma mater, Fort Lee High School. Now, this is what I looked like when I was in Fort Lee High School. Just getting a little bit of long hair here at the beginning of 11th grade. And one day in English class, which was a class, it had one of the kind of classic English teachers, one of these guys who always found a way to make whatever you were doing extremely boring. And kind of just regurgitated the book. And this was not my approach, and I was reading tons of books in the school library. For instance, this is the kind of student I was. The same English teacher assigned us Great Expectations, and we're supposed to read like one chapter, because that was about all the rest of the class could handle. I started reading that chapter and couldn't stop, and instead of doing my earth science homework, and to this day I still don't know what happened to that meandering river, I read the whole book in one weekend. The kind of thing that was not appreciated by him. And beginning of 1 week, he was sick, and we had a substitute teacher. And substitute teachers at Fort Lee High School were fair game for humiliation. I mean, basically, class would spend a couple of minutes figuring out what kind of person they were, and then try to destroy them and get them out and never do the work. But this guy comes in, and I wish I knew his name. I mean, he's there for 3 days of my life. He had long hair, and he had a corduroy jacket on and a plaid shirt and a tie that wasn't tied correctly, wore the same clothes every single day. He didn't look like a teacher. He looked like a graduate student, which is what he was. And he said to the class, "What are you guys reading?" We said, Tintern Abbey or Ode to a Grecian Urn, whatever it was. And he said, "Those are fine works, but we're not going to do that lesson plan in the whole class." Oh, that's interesting. Here's what we're going to do. How many of you have ever been to an amusement park, like on a roller coaster? Now, in Fort Lee, that's like a non-question because Palisades Amusement Park is in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And so we'd all been there many times. Now, he said, suppose it was an amusement park inside your head. And he took out this book, A Coney Island of the Mind, and said, this is an amusement park inside your head by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And he read this passage to us. I'll do the best I can. The poet's eye, obscenely seeing, sees the surface of the round world, and it's America, and its ghost towns and empty Ellis Island, and its surrealistic landscape of mindless prairies, supermarket suburbs, steam-heated cemeteries, Cinerama holy days, and protesting cathedrals, a kiss-proof world of plastic toilet seats, Tampax and taxis, drugged store cowboys, and Las Vegas virgins. Well, now he had our attention. He had said Tampax and virgins in English class. And the rest of the class, we hung on every word, and he read to us from this book. And the next day, I couldn't wait to get back into class because he brought in another book, he started talking about the Beat Generation. And this is one of the primary works. It may have started the Beat Generation to some. Howl by Allen Ginsberg. And this is what he read. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz. Boom! My head fucking blown. I couldn't believe it. It was rock and roll in a book. It was jazz in a book. I never came back. I was the Beat Generation, Allen Ginsberg. My life is on a new course. It was like literary Beatles. And the next day, he brings in another book. Jack Kerouac. You knew that was coming. Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And I'm a big fan of Kerouac. I've read everything he's ever written. Here's some of the Kerouac books that I love, well, especially this one. If you can get, and I think it's everywhere, Dharma Bums. It's not a thick book. Read it. It's exciting. It's San Francisco Beatniks in 1955. I mean, there's orgies in it. There's pot smoking in it. There's poetry readings. There's meditation. Great book. Then Dennis and I now, my friend Dennis Benson and I are hooked, and we go down to the Village, and I get Ginsberg's second most important work at the time, Kaddish, and then Reality Sandwiches. Now, the Beat Generation was basically a male movement. They were sexist, they were misogynistic, and they had many affairs between them. You know, so Allen Ginsberg was an out homosexual. So I'm going to take a minute here and do a little diversion because I think it's only fair to talk about someone whose legacy is kind of lost over the years and who was a wonderful writer and part of the Beat Generation. Her name is Diane DePrima, and this is a really fun book. It's called Memoirs of a Beatnik. And I guess she needed money. She got hired to write this, and it's basically a roman à clef about life in the West Village amongst people like Ginsberg and Kerouac and Neal Cassady. And to spice it up, she added a lot of sex in it, you know. This is a really good book, and she's very talented. Here's a picture of her from those days. Isn't she beautiful? She has gone on, and she's 84 years old now. And this is one of her greatest works, Reflections on My Life as a Woman. What a great chapter. She really is a major talent and doesn't get taught enough. So just passing on the word. And just to show you how crazy I was about the Beat Generation, I bought this record, Howl by Allen Ginsberg, and I played it all the time at home, which my parents did not appreciate. The language, the subject matter. I mean, this guy slept with men. He was so far ahead of his time as far as my household was concerned. And years later, this is something that's interesting. This is Jack Kerouac reading his works to jazz. He was on the Steve Allen show in prime time. Steve Allen played piano, and he read his poetry, his books to Steve. And finally, this is a terrific book called terrific collection on Rhino called The Beat Generation. And it's all about obviously the Beat Generation, and it has poetry readings in it, the music of the Beat Generation, and all these places where the Beat Generation crossed into mainstream culture, like the theme to Route 66 and Maynard G. Krebs. Anyway, it's a lot of fun, and it's worth getting. So, I think it's time to take a break and end Hydrogen Jukebox. And in 5 minutes, we'll move on to the second half, which I call Going Electric.